Welcome everybody to our third and final Fill That Gap YouTube live Q&A event. This is a three-part series and aims to give you ideas on how to improve feed and nutrient efficiency while increasing on-farm environmental outcomes. If you haven't watched part one, which was looking at catch and cover crops, or part two, looking at establishing crops from the year, I recommend watching these videos on the Balance YouTube channel. My name is Amy Dawson and I work for the Science Extension team for Balance Agri-Nutrients based out of Canterbury, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. So 2 weeks ago, we discussed and showed you some case study farms that had successfully established both winter and summer crops from the air using a helicopter. We also talked through some of their key learnings and impacts to their farm systems that these crops had had. So we've mentioned it in the last two talks, but just to bring it to the forefront of our mind again today, that with the recent rules, a consent may be required by winter 2021 for any winter forage grazing of crops that are greater than 50 hectares or 10% of the farm and that are on a greater than 10-degree slope, which is some of the class of country that we'll be showing you today. So we've demonstrated in the last discussion that we can establish successfully a small-seeded forage crop on any sort of sloped country. And I guess now our decision needs to be around where is appropriate based on our slope, stock and crop type. And that'll be some of the points we'll be discussing today. So for this discussion, we're going to be looking at a step-by-step guide on how you go about establishing a crop using a helicopter, some of the watch-outs, and how to graze the crop to ensure the soil stays on the land and minimising environmental impacts. If you want to ask any questions as we go through, just a reminder that you'll need to be logged into your YouTube or Google account to be able to do this. So today we have Murray Lane from the Science Extension team. He's been with us the last three ones, and this is our last one today. So if you haven't watched the previous two ones, Murray, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Yeah, Murray Lane, Northern North Island Science Extension team for Balance, and my background has been in R&D pesticides, time with seeds, and also now with fertilizers in Balance. I guess in that time we've this helicropping concept developed during my time with Monsanto. We developed it further in rights and seeds, and now we're right into it with Balance.
So in part two of the discussion last week, we talked about establishing a crop using a helicopter, and we've sort of mentioned it on the way through. But I guess it sounds very similar to spray and pray, which we've heard around the traps for a while. So what's the difference between those two?
Yeah, about the time we started the program, around the year 2000, there was a group of people who were doing a similar program in the Central North Island, and they had limited their budget to a very low number of dollars, hoping to achieve something. And out of that, it was marginal sometimes and worked sometimes. And so essentially we approach it very differently. A farmer had asked us to give them a hand to sort it, and our goal was, well, what are the variables? So we went into it thinking we need to sort the variables, understand the fertilizer, the weed and pest control, and see if we can do this. So to my mind, helicopter cropping is what it's become now.
Yeah, and it's almost doing spray and pray on steroids, I guess, by actually controlling some of those variables you mentioned.
Yeah, it's about controlling the variables.
Yeah. So in the last video, we talked through four farmer case studies. So is this being adopted wider throughout the industry?
Yes, keep getting calls around it. There is a perceived barrier around cost. Farmers thinking helicopters are expensive, but if you analyse that for a moment, you've got a squirrel helicopter at maybe $2,800 a hectare in general numbers, doing 40 hectares in 6 hours, so it comes down to around about $420, $450 a hectare, which is not too far different from using a cultivator. General contracting costs are $300 to $400, maybe even more, depending on what you're doing from a cultivation point of view. But I mean, what it does, and the interest is over how do we actually do the whole paddock instead of part of the paddock? How do we leave the soil on the land instead of cultivating slopes? How do we grow good crops and get it back into productive pasture? That's the interest. That's where it's coming from.
Yeah, and I guess we're going to talk a lot more in detail about that further on in this discussion as well.
Mm-hmm.
And what about access to key people? Is that something that is often a barrier as well?
Yeah, I think the information is getting out there. We've done a number of field days now, and the information's available on our website as well. And you can go to Helicropping and Balance, and it'll bring some stuff up. But pilots are a really key part of that, and pilots are learning the process and getting better and better at it.
Definitely. And I guess that's the aim of this series as well, is to spread that information wider too.
Yeah.
So helicropping, I mean, we've talked through the last 2 times around how we go about it, but we're going to break it down step by step. So let's move into that sort of part of the session, because I think that's going to be what's interesting a lot of people. So what's the first step, Murray?
Right. Well, Amy, you've just put it up for me. So step 1 is planning, making a decision as to what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. And this little graph we've got here is about giving you a direction regarding animal size and slope. The bigger the animal, the less likely you want to put it on steeper slopes. So small animals on flat land is fine. Bigger animals on flat land is fine. But as you get into steeper slopes, you have to start thinking about what are we doing, because we don't want to lose the soil. We don't want to destroy the place. We want to grow a great crop, harvest that, and have it back into grass. Now, it varies not only with slope and animal, it also varies around what crop are you growing. For example, are you growing Swedes? Swedes and kale are quite different crops. And is it a summer crop or a winter crop? What season are you growing that crop in? A summer crop can easily be grown, grazed, and back into pasture before winter. A winter crop obviously is grown through the summer and then it's harvested in the winter. The key priority is to look after that ground when you're harvesting it in that winter time.
And I suppose soil type probably plays into this as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Some soils are more erodible than others, but knowing with helicopter cropping, you haven't changed the soil structure at all. You've just changed the crop, and then you're putting animals in to graze it, and it'd be nice to pop out the other end having changed nothing else other than crop.
So once we've picked our site and our crop and we've put in, we've made that decision, what's our next step?
Well, I think it's about finding the pilots and getting a guy who's capable or happy to work with you. Capable isn't the right word, but there's a lot of good pilots out there. In fact, most of them are really good pilots. It's about finding somebody who is wanting to do the job, recognizing that his role is establishing a crop, not just flying a helicopter. So you want somebody who's happy to establish the crop, doing it appropriately, and understand the variables around that. And as part of that, it's about looking for a pilot who has who doesn't spray like this. As you can see, that's typical spraying. If you're putting 2,4-D on, for example, you're looking to get good coverage, but broaden your swath. We want them to be spraying like this. So that occurs because you've changed the technology in your aircraft. You've now got what's called AccuFlow nozzles, low drift nozzles. I've been involved in situations going back many years in my time with forestry where drift can be quite devastating, and what we want to do is overcome that opportunity. We want to prevent drift. So use AccuFlow nozzles. That's what they look like. You determine the size of the droplet by the size of those straws. If those straws are small, you get smaller droplets, bigger, you get bigger droplets. So it's about managing that and getting the right guy to do the job with the right technology.
And is these AccuFlow nozzles, are they widely used within the helicopter industry?
It's tremendous, really. More and more pilots have got it. We brought them into New Zealand and Monsanto in around 1990. We introduced them to New Zealand, and it's been tremendous to see the slow uptake from there. So more and more pilots have got them.
Yeah, nice. And you've got some images showing how accurate they are, don't you?
Yeah, good on you, Amy. So this is what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to fly down that fence line and not get anything over the fence, basically keep it all within the paddock. Pilot who did this has done a great job, and he's very proud of what he can achieve.
Yeah. So then our step 3, I guess, is making sure that we're looking after some of that soil.
Yeah, so it's all about good management practice of the soil, and as part of it is, can we direct the spray so that we're not doing any damage on steeper slopes? Farmers deliberately ask not to do damage on those slopes, and it might be you decide not to put a crop on those slopes, as you can see in this photograph here. What about on a bigger face? And this is obviously a very large face. It's probably unlikely to go into a winter crop, more likely a summer crop, but still you can build buffer zones through it. And so it might be that you leave a strip like that, which is grass cover, so that if there is any overland flow, the soil is arrested and it drops out, and maybe another one down here. Key things to think about in your planning process. And then obviously the other thing to think about as we move forward is soil testing. So it's moving to step 4. It's about how do we let's get a soil test done early in the piece, and with that soil test, you can now make a decision around whether the site needs lime. If you're going to brassica crops, are very sensitive to pH. You don't really want it. You want it to be up around 5.8 to 6.2, and no sense putting the lime on the day before the seed goes on. It doesn't make any difference.
No, definitely not. And then what's next? Do we get in there and start doing it yet?
Yeah, good on you. So one of the things about planning in advance is also thinking about what weed spectrum have you got. If I take a very easily recognizable weed, kikuyu in the North and North Island, it really doesn't get controlled well with a Roundup spray in the spring. So you may have started to think about it last autumn when you did the soil test that identified the fact you needed to put lime on, and prior to that you've sprayed it out, the kikuyu, and you put a winter ryegrass in. So that's one of the options you've got up your sleeve. It's about planning in advance. So then we could move on to doing the job, I guess, and so this is, in fact, I could just explain this. When you're doing soil testing on big country, you're looking to cover off strips of maybe 9 or 10 samples across that face in a diagonal, as I've shown in those 2 slides, 2 strips.
Good point.
So if we move on, this is now all about doing the job, and essentially the farmer involved with this treatment, he put the trial that the crop, it was a summer crop, above that track through the middle of the photograph. This is a site where they did 40 hectares in 6 hours, turned up before just on daylight and went home at lunchtime, and job was done, and tremendous value to that farmer. When they've gone home, what you've got is a situation where you've got, it almost looks like nothing's happened, but the crop's now growing. The reason is because on that thistle leaf, there's a little bit of fertilizer, a couple of slug baits, and a few seeds sitting around. You've done the job. You've employed the right pilot. He sprayed the spray within the paddock, and he's evenly distributed the products required across that paddock to achieve your crop, exactly as a drill would do.
So when you're saying products, so what are we looking at putting on in that pass within that 6 hours?
Yeah, really, really important to know. First of all, you're looking to put a herbicide on there, for example, Roundup to control the weed spectrum that's there. It might be an annual ryegrass from last autumn, or it might be the perennial pasture that's there. But with that Roundup, you want to put an insecticide, particularly if you're using brassicas, because they're very susceptible to springtail damage. So a little bit of diazinon will control springtails. The number's around about 300 mils to the hectare. So that's the spraying operation, and then you're covering up. They're going over it a second time. You've taken the booms off. You're going over it a second time with a bucket, putting on the seed, and then a third time the slug bait, and a fourth time the fertilizer. Now, some people mix it. Well, some people put it on 4 passes like that. Others mix it, and there's complications in mixing it. You just need to understand that each of those products, the slug bait, the seed, and the fertilizer, have different ballistics. So how do you control those ballistics? You need to bring your swath right down if you're putting it all on in one pass. Well, it won't be one pass, it'll be 3rd passes of your swath.
Yeah, nice.
So over time it browns out, maybe 1 to 2 weeks, and you've got something happening, and then remarkably this happens. These seedlings start coming through. Now that wouldn't happen if you'd left the springtails in the site. It also wouldn't happen if you left the slugs and snails going, because those seedlings would germinate. They always want to germinate, but they get taken out. That's largely what happens to when we put on more seeds than required, because we know we're going to lose a percentage. I put this photograph in right now to demonstrate that seeds just want to grow. That's where a flyover occurred over a metal dump. There was no weeds, there was no fertility, there was no slugs, and no springtails, and the seeds just germinated, and it's just remarkable. They got about that size. You can see the insects have attacked them now, but they're just lacking nutrition. And so the goal is to put it all together, control the weeds, the pests, the slugs, the springtails, give it some good nutrition.
And it goes back right to what you said, the difference between helicropping and spray and pray is around controlling the variables, isn't it? Yeah.
That's right. I mean, this slide is indicative of what can happen out there. You've got a log on the ground or a rush like that. There's more slugs in that slug hotel than the slug bait can control. So a percentage survive, and they march out every night and they consume your crop. And when it comes to fertility, it's important to make sure that you address the fertility right. So with helicopter cropping, we're putting on a capital dressing, looking to not only grow a great crop for the summer period or for next winter harvest, but also to take this into a new pasture later on and ensure that new pasture performs at a high level. So if you end up with a situation like this, you just haven't put enough fertilizer on. Those bigger looking crop plants there are because there was a dung patch or a urine patch from prior to the crop going in. So it's about putting on the right amount of fertilizer. And with helicopter cropping, the standard position is 400 kilograms of crop seal boron boost with brassicas because you need the boron, and a side dressing. So essentially you're putting on about 70 kilograms of N with the seed, and then you're coming with a side dressing with maybe another 75 kilograms of N.
And traditionally, a lot of this country may even be nitrogen hungry, particularly if it's out of some of those native pastures as well.
Yeah, good point, Amy, because not a lot of clover is growing there.
Cool. And then I'm guessing we're going to graze the crop at some point.
Yeah. So when it comes to grazing, it's important to, you've made your decision around the slope and the animal type and the season and the crop type. So it's about grazing it to keep the soil intact. You're already ahead of yourself because you've done an aerial no-till job. You've left the soil structure intact. So now it's about prioritizing harvesting the crop, but looking after the soil. So if you were to strip graze that hillside, for example, you're going to concentrate animals against a hot wire, and you're going to end up with a lot of damage. That's optimizing the crop and reducing its waste. But the other way to look at it as well, can I optimize or minimize soil damage? And so let's block graze this. We give the animals 3 or 4 days and move them at, give them 4 days, move them at 3 days. That's another way of looking at it. And essentially, you end up with a cropping situation like a grazing situation like this, where the animals are comfortable, are busy eating the stuff. In this case, it's rape, and it's going to recover. You only want to take that much off it. You don't want to bear it down to the ground, and they'll come back and take it, clean it up. But it could be with Swedes exactly the same. 4 days offered, 3 days I've eaten most of the Swedes, and they come back later on to pick up the last period of Swedes. Depending on weather as well. Obviously, if you've got a really nice dry period, you might leave them there for longer.
Mm-hmm. And what about once the crop's been grazed?
Yes, so once the crop's been grazed, there's a number of options for us. And first of all, it's about what is the crop. If it's been a summer crop and you've harvested it by end of April, for example, you're going to put it back in a new perennial pasture. With a helicopter, it flies over and does the job, and then you come back and graze it. If it's a crop like this one was Swedes going into kale next season, this has been sown in the middle of July with an annual ryegrass. And that annual ryegrass looks slow initially, but by the time you get to October, this is what you've got. You've protected the soil. You've grown what we call a cover crop. It also is a catch crop, pulling back nitrogen from deeper down the roots wherever they can find nitrogen. They're going to hang on to that for you. And when you terminate this crop, that nitrogen then is released for the next crop coming in.
And yeah, if anyone who wants more information on catch or cover cropping, make sure you go and check out the first one of these series, because we do go into quite a bit of detail around that as well.
There's a really important point I should raise, when it comes to putting in your perennial pasture after their summer crop. You're going to do it according to soil moisture. You're not going to do it on the 1st of March because you always did it on the 1st of March with a drill. You're going to do it when the moisture is around. So you're helicopter cropping, you're putting bare seed on the surface, and you're wanting that seed to have every opportunity to do well. So let's give it every opportunity by waiting for the moisture to be there. You may also need slug bait at that point and perhaps another top up with fertilizer, but yet to be identified depending on your soil test, etc.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So, people will be looking at a lot of this helicropping, the steps that we've just looked through, and look at some of that country and think, how does this environmentally, I guess, stack up? So do you have any comments around any environmental work or how we go about protecting the soil?
Yeah, the project we're involved with at the moment with the Sustainable Farming Fund from MPI is primarily focused on that. We know how to grow the crops, so now it's about how do we actually harvest that crop and leave the soil intact. We know already from the last couple of years' work that we can grow a summer crop, have it grazed, and then back into pasture for the winter, and you haven't changed the soil structure. It's pretty important to recognise that you do nothing to the soil when you establish it, and when you're harvesting it, doing a good job, you're not going to damage it, and it's back in the new perennial pasture after that. With a winter crop, it's a slightly different situation. You want to graze it, and as I said earlier, to minimise soil damage and then get it back into a cover crop or back into a perennial pasture again, sow in midwinter to look after that soil. Yeah.
And you've done, because you've looked at some of that, looking at after a winter runoff event and a no-till or helicropping versus a cultivated land?
Yeah, early in the discussion, I introduced the idea of putting buffer strips of grass across that hillside. A couple of really big values come out of that, is if there is overland flow, that buffer strip of old grass is able to arrest that overland flow and drop sediment out. The other is that if it was, for example, rape or kale, it gives you an opportunity to put your hot wire across that line instead of having to slash your way through. Because you can't drive a motorbike through it or a mower through it. So, so buffer strips, and it might be, and in fact, farmers are doing this, they go around the site, they're looking to put their helicrop in, and they'll deliberately dig holes as sediment traps, knowing where the water is going to flow off that land. Let's have a sediment trap there, capture it so it doesn't get into the stream. But primarily you want to keep it on the land rather than even flowing anywhere.
Yeah, and you'll be doing some work this winter as well, looking at the impact of those buffer strips.
Yes, we've got a site already down near Tihoe in central North Island where the animals have grazed it. We'll be going down tomorrow to check out what has happened. And the farmer's indication is that we've arrested the soil. So
nice. So the other thing, I guess, we talked about it right at the start around barriers, is around the perceived cost. So have you ever done any economic analysis around the cost of helicropping and I guess the payback of that?
Yes, we have, Amy. And so there's, as a proviso in front of making comments, I know that whenever you do any economic analyses online like this, and or the field day, people will find a hole in it. So these are assumptions that we're making here, and there's some very good information to justify those assumptions. But let's move on to where we're going there. So if we look at this situation here, first of all, what I want to do is look at the cost of establishing the crop. And I said earlier that it costs around about the same as growing a crop with cultivation. So if you look at the numbers there, you've got the helicopter charge, and maybe that's $400, $425 a hectare. You've got fertilizer going in, and that's in the order of $500. Then you've got some seed, and then you've got crop protection coming to $1,400, maybe $1,500. So those numbers are easy to come by, easy to organise, and so easy to identify. There's another number which you can fairly well estimate, and that is the opportunity cost of the lost pasture production that goes with putting this crop in. So what would have you grown if you hadn't put that crop in? And so in this case, we've assumed it was an area of farm growing maybe 7 tonnes. It's a hill country piece of land annually, but we're having our crop from November to August, and so let's bring that back to 5.5 tonnes that we've lost. And at 10 cents a kilogram dry matter, presuming it's brown top and fog, and at, for example, 80% utilisation, that's worth around about $440. So you add those together and you end up with a costing of about $1,800. But then you've got the yield that goes with that. So what is the value of that crop? And in this case, I've been a little bit conservative, saying let's take a 12-tonne crop. It's not going to be a perfect crop from a helicrop. It's going to be a great crop, but there's going to be areas where it's not going to be so good. Steeper land is going to be lower. More fertile land will be higher. So let's be conservative and say we're going to grow a 12-tonne crop of, for example, Swedes. We're throwing some plantain in there. It's going to have a high value. So the value of that crop is around about 25 cents a kilogram dry matter. 80% utilisation gives us a value point of $2,500 income. If you put the plantain in, you've got another sum to add to it, and that might be the yield of the plantain 6 or 8 weeks after you've grazed the Swedes, and the plantain is recovered, and there's a value point there. So adding all those together, we end up with around about $1,800 worth of costs. In this example, $2,500 worth of income. So we've at least broken even, and maybe we've got $500 in our pocket.
And so just for those that may have missed our previous discussions, we talked about co-establishment, where we establish both plantain and Swedes together, with the plantains growing up through post-grazing of the Swedes, just for those that may have missed it.
Yeah, and we're still working on that. It's looking very good on the Central North Island. It's about how much competition does the plantain offer to those Swedes, and basically, can we have a companion crop growing after we've grazed the Swedes? So they're moving on. When you look at the economics of this job, what we're trying to do really is not only grow a great crop to finish a few animals or whatever they're useful for, and you, as a farmer, you've got a value point in your mind as to what you're going to use this crop for and the reason for it, and you can see there's some good numbers there. But the other part of this development is actually putting it back and preparing it for new perennial pasture that will perform at a higher level for a much longer period of time, maybe for the next 7 or 8, maybe 10 years, depending on how it's managed. So the next slide I'll bring up is to identify that situation. So what we've done here is we've said, well, we've grown our crop, we've broken even, or got a few $100s in our pocket. From now on, we want it to be a high performing pasture with clover, ryegrass and pasture, and clover pasture. So over the next 5 years, total dry matter production over each of these 5 years estimated, if we'd done nothing, it'd be 7 tonne, 7 tonne, 7 tonne, etc. If we'd done a fast development with a helicopter, it might be 5 years of 12 tonne of dry matter production. Or there's another option out there, which is, well, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce fertility over time and slowly build the fertility, expecting the clover to form, fixing nitrogen, allowing ryegrasses to actually produce more. So we've called this the control situation, this one here, the slow development, and this the fast development. Then we've got, out of each of those, the average yield of dry matter is, when the control is 7,000 kilograms of dry matter, the slow development 8,500, and the fast development in the order of 12,000 kilograms of dry matter. So we can now put a value point against each of those, or in fact a cost against each of those. In this case, we're building the cost of the applied fertilizer to maintain that. So obviously it's 7 tonnes of dry matter. It's not a very good pasture, and so it's probable that the maintenance would have been at a lower level. Standard maintenance for this situation might be 20 kilograms of P per hectare. Let's say on the control we're putting on a half a kilogram. We're putting on half of that, so 10 kilograms of P, costing in superphosphate equivalent terms a bit just over $100. With our slow development, we're going to do better than that. We're going to put on twice maintenance. So that's 2 times maintenance, putting on 40 kilograms of P, costing $440. With our fast development, remember we've put all that capital fert in with the crop we've grown. 400 kilograms of crop seal boron boost went in there, meaning being justified by a great crop, but actually resulting in a great crop.
Oh no, we've lost Murray. Apologies, everybody. We seem to have lost Murray. We'll just try and bring him back on. Oh, we've got him.
What happened there, Amy? But
yeah, we lost you, Murray. That's right. We've recovered.
Yes, I'll share the screen again.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know what happened there, Amy, but this hasn't happened before. Hopefully it doesn't happen again.
No, it hasn't. You haven't got bad weather up in Hamilton, have you?
No, that's not a bad day. So where we got to, if we come back to that screen that I've shared with you, Amy, has it arrived?
No, it hasn't arrived yet, Murray. Just have to.
Okay. Well, I've shared it.
Oh, we've lost him again. Oh dear. Okay, well, what we might do if we can't bring him back, but essentially what Murray was trying to explain when he was going through that economic information was around the fact that the fast development, you're actually forefronting a lot of that fertilizer at the start, whereas that moderate development, you're putting it on annually to try and build that fertility slowly over time. So we keep losing you, Murray, so...
It's not happening within this office, but it's happening somewhere else. I'm not quite sure why. But so we're back on deck now?
We're back on.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Keep a smile on. So essentially you've put that capital fert on, as Amy was just saying, and so from now on, your maintenance fert is really just about what is the opportunity, what's required for this 12-ton yield. And so we've assessed that as 1.2 times the maintenance, the original maintenance, meaning 24 kilograms of P, meaning $266 a hectare. So you can see a comparison there. And then if we go on with the next. So we can then convert each of those to a value point called superphosphate, and at $315 a tonne, we're looking at 35 kilograms of P going on in the control annually with some application cost, maybe $45 all total. In the slow development area, we're looking at 140 plus 40, $180 total cost. And in the rapid development area, fast development area, helicrop area, we're looking at in the order of $107 a hectare per year as our maintenance. So that set the scene for what's going to happen to maintain that new perennial pasture. So now if we move on to the next slide, and I think this is almost the last slide, it starts off with going over those same points, and that is we've got a control, we've got a slow development, and we've got a fast development or helicrop area. And this is the cost of the maintenance fert going on. And then it's about saying, righto, let's look at how we can put a value point to that. So beef and lamb have a benchmark based on 2018-19 assessment. The profit before tax on this class of land is about $250 a hectare, based on it being reasonable but not perfect. So the assumption is that where we've got poor pasture doing 7 tonne of dry matter per hectare, we're producing about 83% of the yield of that 253. Or we've got slowly developing pasture, we're going to do maybe 100% of that yield. We've got well-developed or fast-developed pasture, we're going to do 143% of that yield. So the next line brings up all of those numbers converted to dollars. So this $210 is 83% of that, of 250, and obviously the slow development is 250, and the fast development is the return is $360 a hectare. So what we've done here is we've looked at the value point of the crop at the front end and saying, well, what value can we bring? And I'd like to think it would at least return, cover its costs. And we've been a little bit conservative, saying 12-tonne crop. Let's assume we're going to get a 12-tonne crop. You may get 15-tonne crop or more, depending on rainfall and other factors. And then the long-term value is what comes out of that perennial pasture you've just established. And in this case, the suggestion is you're going to get around about $350 a hectare return versus what could have been $250 or do nothing, $210. So I hope I've made myself clear. It's yeah.
Yeah, so the main difference, I guess, when we're starting to look at some of the difference between the slow developed and the fast development is that you're really front loading that cost when you're doing the initial helicropping, but then from there on out, your cost is reduced and you're getting more from it because you're able to grow a better quality pasture.
Absolutely, Amy. Well done. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Hopefully there'll be no more hiccups from now on. So Murray, you've been working with farmers doing helicropping for quite a long time. So what's some of the key learnings, or what have you learned along the way?
Well, there's a lot of things we've learned, and the first one I'd like to put out there is that we can grow small-seeded forage crops almost anywhere. It comes with that comes a responsibility of let's look after the land if we're going to do this. Is it going to be a summer crop, a winter crop? What animal is going to graze it? What's the slope of that? And do we need a resource consent, etc.? One of the things that stood out very early in the development is that if you don't put the slug bait out there, don't bother putting the seed, And it might be you just fly the site and feel like you've done a good job. You can tick that box. The other is you consider soil moisture always. So I mentioned earlier, when you're going back in new perennial pasture, make sure you are putting that seed on relative to soil moisture. And if you've got perennial weeds that need multiple sprays, then you're going to start last autumn. If you don't control the weeds and the pests and put fertilizer on, then you're not going to do a good job. So, what are identify the weeds, identify the pests, address those guys. And fertility-wise, you're looking to the long term to put a new perennial pasture in that's going to perform. And as I said earlier, summer crops can be back into perennial pasture for that winter. Really important to know that winter crops are quite a different situation, where you can put it back into perennial pasture, but you have to take responsibility for the grazing of that and the damage that comes with it. So I think we've learned quite a few. And if you are in a winter crop, maybe between crops, you put a cover crop in there to arrest soil movement and also to pull back some nitrogen.
So we've just had a question actually come through here saying, Murray, have you settled on a seeding rate that's the best value for Swedes?
Yeah, so the seeding rates, we haven't done any specific work on that, but what we've looked at is what's commercially happening and where we're getting the results. And so the number is around about 150, so 1.5 times a standard seeding rate, recognizing that attrition is going to occur more so than if you deliberately place the seed in the soil in a groove with a seed drill. There's more attrition likely to occur with helicopter cropping.
And that would be no different than if you broadcast it on a flat as well.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Thanks for that question, Todd. So, in terms of the sustainable farming funds, we talked about that these series are a part of that project. So, what's the future direction, or how much longer have you got of that project? What are you going to aim to achieve?
Well, where we're focusing now is on cover crops, catch crops. How do we arrest the soil and prevent it from moving with the winter grazing? We know that we can grow the summer crops and leave the soil intact, and we can have it back into perennial pasture without damaging the soil. So that's our key focus right now. Part of that is monitoring soil compaction. So when you're grazing it in the wintertime, there's a lot of animals there. Their hooves are compacting the soil. Under what conditions do you get compaction, and how much? And then obviously, how do we prevent that? And it's also looking at buffer strips. Can we arrest any soil movement? So those things are happening right now.
No, great point. So just as some information as well that's summarised for all this discussion that we've had today, there is a helicropping fact sheet which you can access through www.balance.co.nz/helicropping. And that fact sheet really just steps through some of the discussion points that we've talked about today. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and apologies for our mishap in the middle there. And this, just as a reminder, this is the final discussion of the 3-part series that we've had over the last month looking at helicropping. So our first Q&A session, we had Brendan Malcolm from Plant and Food, as well as Murray, and we discussed catch and cover cropping, the research, the importance of sowing a catch and cover crop, which Murray's re-emphasised today, to really capture those nutrients, keep soil on the land, and also grow some additional feed. In our second session, which we had 2 weeks ago, also with Murray, we went on to discuss how you can successfully establish a crop from the using the helicopter, and we talked through some different case study farms that had some really success with helicropping. And then finally today, we've talked through step by step on how we go about doing a helicrop, as well as looking through some of the economics. Just see Murray's dropped off again. And so what we do is encourage you guys to go and have a look at those previous 2 discussions if you haven't already. And if you want further information, please go to our website, www.balance.co.nz/helicropping. We're also in the process of developing a guide for contractors as well, and we'll update it on our website when that is completed. So we encourage you to share these talks with other rural professionals and farmers as well. And just we'd really like to thank the Sustainable Farming Fund project, which this is a part of, our sponsors who have been involved, particularly Beef and Lamb New Zealand, Agri-Nutrients, Pledge Rights and Seeds, and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, and also all of our farmers and contractors who have helped us do this work. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.